Well, that's one gloomy view of how things are, but is it as simple as that? With me to look back at 2008 and ahead to hopefully a brighter 2009 is shareholder activist Stephen Mayne. He's in Melbourne, and in Sydney, independent economist Peter Switzer. So, Stephen Mayne, can I start with you? Just picking up from that last report, is it right that once the economy starts to slow and people start being more careful with money, then we are set on course for an inevitable downward spiral?
Well, I think that's what we've just seen over the last 6 months. Everybody's income is falling, whether you're relying on Chinese iron ore sales, whether you're relying on cash in the bank, whether it's the dividends from your shares. Everyone's income is falling, and that is feeding through into falling prices. And as that story just said, people are sitting on their hands and waiting on the sidelines until things settle down. So we are in an unprecedented spiral. And the US government, for instance, have cut interest rates to zero and are madly printing money. So that's the extent of the problem as far as they see it.
So, Peter Switzer in Sydney, what's going to happen or has to happen in order to pull us out of that downward spiral, to make things settle down?
Well, the one thing that was left out of that story was the fact that governments actually have responded extraordinarily. In Australia, we've seen 300 basis points cuts in home loan interest rates, with some fiscal stimulation packages. Ironically, if the rest of the world had responded like Rudd and Swan have, I don't think the problems would be so great. The Europeans were raising interest rates 3 months ago. The Americans were carrying on like a bunch of nincompoops in Congress. They couldn't arrive at a fiscal stimulation package and also the money available for the bank rescues. But in a sense now, I think they're getting it right. And so that will break the spiral, the fact that there is going to be a lot more income thrown in at the economies. As Stephen said, they're going to print money, which is something we haven't seen for a long, long time. But it will work and it will arrest the spiral.
But how long will that take, Stephen Mayne?
Well, it'll take a lot less here because we got onto it early. In the case of America, we probably won't see any decent signs of recovery until the middle of the year, and even then there'll only be early stages of recovery. Hopefully by the end of next year we might see something that the stock market might react to around the middle of the year. Stephen,
do you go along with that?
Well, Peter, I worry that what is left for the US government to do? I mean, they can't put interest rates to negative. They've already pumped $1 trillion in. They've nationalised the banking system. They've got nothing left in the locker to fire. In Australia, I'm also worried about what's left in the locker. We've had the government basically go into deficit. We've slashed interest rates, and we're heading into a recession next year. So I'm very nervous that we could see things in Australia like bank share prices fall by 20, 30, 40%. House prices fall by 20, 30%, and unemployment rise. I mean, the Americans had a 500,000 increase in unemployment in 1 month. And I'm very nervous about, once we get through Christmas, it's going to be very, very ugly in January through to the middle of the year.
Peter Switzer, are we heading into a recession?
Well, I think Australia's closer to recession than ever before. But certainly in the case of America, you know, I agreed with Stephen for a while there that, you know, there's nothing left in the locker, but the reality is printing money, they can actually do that. They can actually take shares in banks. There's a whole lot of things that they can do. There are monetary policy weapons that we haven't seen used for 20 or 30 years, and Stephen's so young he probably forgets what they used to do in the old days, but they actually can put more stimulation into the economy. But I agree with him, this is the most serious that we've ever seen before, and there's good reason to worry. But I don't see a depression coming. Stephen's scenario is closer to a depression. I see a long recession that will eventually get better towards the end of 2009.
Let's just get down to the nitty-gritty then. Where should people put their money in 2009? What are your plans, Stephen Mayne?
Well, I've lost 100,000 on the share market. I've been chasing it down, and now I'm a seller. I'm nervous that the All Ordinaries is going to fall below 3,000. I think that the resources bubble has burst. We're about to see a massive, probably 50–60% cut in coal and iron ore contracts from next year. And the thing that really scares me about Australia is we've got $1 trillion of foreign debt, $1 trillion of household debt, and our households are the most indebted in the world in percentage terms, except for the British. So the federal government, the Reserve Bank, are going to have to cut interest rates substantially from here to try and stimulate the economy. I'm just trying to conserve what I've got, and I'm not certainly buying shares at the moment. I think it's going to fall another 10 or 20%.
Peter, what are your plans for next year?
I'm more optimistic than Stephen. generally speaking, when the American consumer confidence gets to its lowest level, which I think we saw in October, November, it started to rise. Stock market invariably will bounce over the next 6 months by about 25 to 30%. I'm sticking to history, but I can see why Stephen is negative, but I'm going for the positive line, and we will see a recovery around the middle of 2009 in the stock market. Then the real economy will kick in later on in 2009.
All right, thank you both, Peter Switzer in Sydney and Stephen Mayne in Melbourne.
Thanks, Roz.
See you, Roz.
Queensland Premier